My name is Laura Christian. I'm the director of the Thomas Welch Library, and I'm very excited to welcome you all today for today's symposium. Thank you so much for joining us. We've been planning this event with Alicia for a long time, and we're so excited that it's here and to hear what the speakers have to say. I just have a few notes. One, if you have not previously visited the library, I welcome you to come upstairs after the symposium or during the break at lunchtime and explore the library. It's a wonderful resource. It's open today. We'd be happy to help you with any quick research questions. We hope you'll come back and explore further. Two, very important, if you need the restrooms, they are located directly behind this room, across the hall. We also have a water fountain that is to the left near the elevator. So if you need that, although we do have some water scattered around the room. Other than that, just want to make sure everyone's aware this program is being recorded. Although if you're in the seats out here, you will not be on camera. However, we will record audio of you. Camera can't actually move that way that we have now, which is new for us, but we promise not to actually use it.
unless I mistakenly move it, but I think we're okay. Yeah.
Again, I'm very excited that you're here, but I want to turn the program over to Alicia Cohen, who has organized this wonderful event. You. Thank you. With the support of the library, the director, the chair of the Black History Committee, reshape, and there, my volunteers, Anna, my twin, how I could put this together without her, and our speakers we're excited about. So we want to get started with the first speaker, which is Rick Murphy. He is the President General of the Society of First African Families of English America. And I will draw your attention to, as you use the program on the back, and you will see the QR codes. So more in-depth information is on the bios of our speakers when you use the QR code. So I'm just going to keep it very short so we can get started. And I'm happy to see people from all over the county and Fairfax and I guess the fun. So thank you very much for coming, and I'll turn it over to Rick and Anna.
Good morning. And first, on behalf of Shelley Murphy and Andrea Davis, the other speakers, on behalf of the three of us, we want to really thank the library board and committee for inviting us. We also want to thank the Black History Committee for your gracious invitation as well. So we want you to know how appreciative we are to be here today. We're very appreciative of this for a number of reasons, and I think it will come out during the presentation. But while you're here to hear about the Black loyalists and the forgotten patriots, we all descend from them. So you're talking to, listening to, and hopefully appreciating the descendants of these brave men, women, and children who one way or another contributed to the Revolutionary War cause, and to that end were founders of America. So as we go along here, every now and then I'm going to have to take a sip, so I'll apologize in advance that I have a dry throat. So I'm not trying to be rude, but for you to hear me the best, I have to do that. So this is the untold story of the forgotten patriots of the Northern Theater. As the President General Emeritus of the Society of the First African Families of English America, we assembled over 100 people who are scholars, descendants, historians, genealogists, to write the story of the American Revolution through the eyes of the Black soldiers. There are so many books out there about the American Revolution, but we really wanted to do this from the perspective of the Black soldier. And we have 5 books that are going to be coming out, and this is a discussion about the Northern Theater. So I'm not going to talk about each and every soldier. I'm really going to give you the background information as to why these men and women and children enlisted, and I'm also going to tell you about the legacy of them. So that's really what this discussion is going to be about. So this is the book, America's Forgotten Patriots, and again, it's a 5-part series. And the authors of this particular book is Connie Kurtz, Deborah Newton Carter, Lisa Fox, Jackie Hill, and Judith Sanford Harris. And again, we assembled a team over 100 scholars, researchers, historians, genealogists, and most important, descendants. So we really brought together a group of people to come together to write the story of these forgotten patriots. Now, I descend from 14 Revolutionary War patriots, 14. 8 of them who are Americans of African ancestry. So I'm very proud because this is in me. This is my DNA. This is who I am. So when you see me passionately, you'll understand that the ancestors are speaking to me, through me, and to each of you. So I descend. So these are who the men I descend. And Drummer Boy was 10 years old. He lied in his application, said he was 11. The Virginia Militia, the Virginia Regiment, North Carolina, Green Mountain Boys. So you can see the diversity of the soldiers who are in my family. And for those of you who say, well, how does he really know this? Most of these have been documented by DAR, SAR, a whole bunch of lineage societies. So again, it's real. So the theaters of war, there were 5 of them. There was the Northern Theater, the Mid-Atlantic Theater, the Southern Theater, the Western Theater, and the Naval Theater. And you can see the North, and it covered most of New York, with the exception of that area which the British controlled, the Mid-Atlantic, the Southern, the Western, and the Naval, which was around the world. So those are the 5 theaters of war, and African-American soldiers and indigenous soldiers participated in all of those. So this is the untold story. This is the story you're not going to hear anywhere else. Now, the forgotten patriots from the Northern Theater, they served very long tours. And we're going to talk about their tour of duty. And most of them, they served throughout the entire length of the war. And as you can see, Northern Theater, Mid-Atlantic, Southern, Western, Naval, they were involved in all of them. So this isn't just a story about them coming from the North, only serving in the North. They actually became the first permanent military, which we'll get into momentarily. The forgotten patriots of the Northern Theater, they fought in every single battle, including but not limited to all of the major battles of the war. So this wasn't a situation where a little battle here and a little battle there. They were in every single battle. Now, you'll hear me say that through history, some of the British generals, some of the French generals, some of the Prussian generals always mentioned that when they looked out, they saw some Winnie Brown faces. Now, that's been denied to us in history, and I'll explain a little bit more, but they visually were seeing these brown faces, and they couldn't quite understand it, but you will shortly. Now, we've always heard about the shot heard around the world. We learned that in the textbooks, we learned that in grade school, and we heard that the shot around the world is really what sparked the Revolutionary War. And I guess that's true to some degree, but for Americans of African ancestry, it really started in Boston when the British arrived. Now, we all know the story where England sent all these troops and they wanted them to be housed in the residence of the colonists in Boston. That's really where it started. And it started there because of the Boston Massacre. And the Boston Massacre, the first person to be shot was Crispus Attucks. So he was the first to die for the Revolutionary War cause. So you'll see where I have these iconic pictures, and there's a reason why I'm showing these iconic pictures, but you'll get to see and understand a little bit later on. And I always try to write who the artist is and where you can find those iconic pictures, because it really is a story of my ancestors, our ancestors hiding in plain sight. So this is an actual picture, a rendition of what Crispus Attucks looks like. And they say that's his signature, and I'm not sure whether that is or not. But Crispus Attucks, again, was the first to die for the Revolutionary War cause. Now, what's very interesting, those of you who go to Wikipedia and you look at Wikipedia, In the last 30, 45 days, his whole racial classification has changed. So for 250 years, we've learned that he was Afro-Indigenous. So when you read the beginning of the Wikipedia article and you come down to the end of the Wikipedia article, someone says, well, we're not really sure what his race is. Now, we have an idea who's writing these articles, but these pictures have been around since the late 1700s, which I will show you momentarily. Now, the Boston Massacre from March 5th, 1770 to Bunker Hill was a city that was very much in turmoil. There was chaos, there was frustration because of what was going on relative to taxation. You got the Stamp Act, the Intolerable Act. There were a number of things that were taking place, and these folks were learned folks. Now, I don't want to have a religious discussion, but the Congregational Church was a big church in Massachusetts, and it was a church of the congregation. So they would come and have meetings, and there was a lot of discussions, there was a lot of talk. So these discussions came up over and over again about they want them in our houses, they're taxing us, they're doing this, they're doing that. Kind of like what we do today when we're very frustrated with our politicians. But that's what they were doing back in Boston back then. So when Britain started, Britain, because they were Britain by then, when they started sending the troops to Boston, it really was a frustrating time. And every time ships came over, these Brits, the Royal Army, got off the ships, red coats, in formation, and they got off the ships as if they were going to a battle. So they made people feel really uncomfortable in the city. So we know about April 1775, the Battle of Lexington, when they were trying to hide arms and the British went out there, you can see in the upper right-hand corner, and that's what everyone talks about, the shot heard around the world. Then at Concord, coming over the bridge, that's really what we learned in school, and that was our introduction to the Revolutionary War. But did you know that these men of African and Indigenous descent served at the Battle of Lexington and Concord? We didn't learn that. And that's part of what we're doing in the books that we're writing. We're introducing you to these different men. We know who was wounded in battle. Stockbridge Indian, Wampanoag band of the Mohegan Nation. So we have their racial identification and what nations they came from. And I'll explain momentarily how we know that. And then we had the Battle of Bunker Hill, June 1775. Now, I have an ancestor's brother, so once removed, who was at Bunker Hill, caught smallpox, and is actually buried on Bunker Hill because 5 of them had smallpox and they didn't want it to get out, so they buried them where they dropped. That's where they buried them. But we also know that all of these other men also were at the Battle of Bunker Hill. And here's my ancestor's brother, James Milton. My grandmother's maiden name is Milton, and she was from North Carolina. And when she came up to Boston, married, she knew she had an ancestor buried up on Bunker Hill and talked about it all the time. And when I was a teenager, I was part of a program. The gentleman brought me over, had no knowledge that I knew this, and said, I want to show you where these Revolutionary War soldiers are, and we know there's a Black man here. And I told him the story of my grandmother. So again, it's interesting that we didn't know all of these men of color were at these particular battles. Now, part of what I'm going to do is, again, these iconic pictures, and you can see in this iconic picture, an African-American man there. He's also now on the US Postal Stamp Battle of Bunker Hill. So now we're beginning to make the connections that more and more people are beginning to learn about this stuff, understand it, and begin to appreciate the fact that forgotten patriots were forgotten, and I'll tell you why they were forgotten. We also know that Salem Poor was at the Battle of Bunker Hill. And Salem Port actually led some of the regiments over the hill against the British. So you all can read about this on your spare time, but in a program such as this here, I'm just letting you know that while you may see a picture here, a picture there, you may hear a story here, a story there, there really was very much cohesion in terms of what was going on. Now, in June 1775, after the Battle of Lexington and Concord, and after the Battle of Bunker Hill, the Continental Congress promoted George Washington as the commander-in-chief. A gentleman from Virginia. His viewpoints were very different than the viewpoints up in Massachusetts. Massachusetts was a society that had slaves, whereas Virginia was a society based on enslavement. So it was very, very different in terms of how they looked at stuff. So now he's taking control. He's going to take control of the army. He's now going up to Massachusetts. And in July 1775, when he went to Massachusetts, and although this rendition is very different, these guys are standing in uniforms, it was a ragtag bunch of men. Old men, young men, drunk men. So it was a ragtag bunch. But what bothered Washington the most, he cannot get over the number of brown faces who were standing there with guns. Because again, he's coming from a slave society. And in a slave society, Black men with guns meant a revolution in your own backyard, slave raids. So he was very concerned about that. So what did he do is 8 days later, it has been represented to the general that several Negroes have been enticed into this army. The general therefore orders that no Negro be enlisted anymore. He didn't want them in the army. Now, the story doesn't end there, but again, days after he arrives, he can't get over the fact that all these men of color are in his army of all things, his army. Therefore, he resolved that no slaves be admitted to any army upon any consideration whatever. That's in the journals of the Continental Congress in 1775. In other words, out, I want them out. We can't have them in our army. However, Dunmore, John Murray, 4th Earl of Dunmore, Royal Governor of Virginia, he knew how to use race. And he knew that those Southern colonies would flip backwards if they knew that enslaved men were coming down with guns. And he didn't want the Southern colonies to get involved with that mess up there in the North with them Yankees up in Boston. So he says, what we're going to do is I'm going to issue a proclamation and I will entice any slave that leaves a colonist household into the British Army, freedom. That created a lot of problems for Washington, this Dunmore proclamation. Now, approximately 800 to 2,000 escaped slaves fled to the British Army under this proclamation, and there was another one that came later. But when Washington got word of this, he knew, well, wait a minute, I'm having problems enlisting people. I'm not getting white farmers to enlist. They're not interested. Now, I got the drunks, I got the old folks, but I'm not getting able-bodied men. So Washington had to say, if that man is not crushed before spring, he will become the most formidable enemy America has. His strength will increase as a snowball by rolling, and faster if some expedient cannot be hit upon the convenience, the slaves and service of the impropriety of the conduct. In other words, he's saying, wait a minute. If I know how many slaves there are down there, and if they're now off of the crown, we're going to have problems. There is no way of keeping the army up by drafting or enlisting Negroes. And that was December 31st, months after he originally said they cannot come into the military. So any myth that, and there's a big, strong myth that Blacks were not in the Revolutionary War because Washington wouldn't let them. I'm here to let you know on December 31st, 1775, in his own papers, this is what he wrote. It has been represented to me that free Negroes who have served in this army are very much dissatisfied at being discarded. I have presumed to depart from the resolution respecting them and have given them license for their being enlisted. So in other words, he's saying, you saw the names at Bunker Hill, you saw the names at Lexington and Concord, they're not happy. And see, from the period of March 5th, 1770, with the assassination of Crispus Attucks, the Black and Indigenous up in Massachusetts knew if they wanted their freedom, and using the same language that the white colonists are using, that they need to be involved in this conflict as much as possible to get their full citizenship rights. So he heard correctly. At the Second Continental Congress, they voted for independence. So on July 4th, 1776, We the People, a beautiful written document. And again, in those congregational churches up in Boston, they talked about we the people. They talked about the articles. They talked about what was in the Declaration of Independence. And unlike in the South, where the enslaved did not live in the master's house, in the North, there was only one enslaved person. They were living in the house. They were living close by. They traveled to the town centers to hear these conversations. So the question came up about we the people. Now, the Declaration of Independence was the best of the Roman Republic and the best of Greek democracy. And that was important because it had the political ideal model of governments that unites order, justice, and freedom. Order, justice, and freedom. Beautiful words that sounded so sweet to the enslaved in Boston, made sense to them. So, equality of all people made sense to them. Unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that these rights come from God, not from governments. These rights come from God. They understood that. Because many of those in Boston, based on their pension records, had just come over on the boats from Africa. So they themselves knew firsthand how rights came from God. This made a lot of sense to them, and you'll see momentarily. Government derives its power from the people and to protect the natural rights of the citizens. And from the pension records, we see that these people are coming from tribal nations where this is the order of how their population lived in Africa. We, the people, made sense to them. So when someone says, who are we, the people? Well, the Black citizens in Massachusetts says, we are the people. They participated in those conversations. They participated amongst themselves. They were having the exact same conversations. Now, let's talk numbers now. So before we get too far adrift and before I get ahead of my skis, I want to talk some numbers. So those of you who are analytical, 993 men served in the Revolutionary War from Connecticut. 33 from New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine, 286, Massachusetts, 1,861, New York, 242, Rhode Island. So a total from the North, 4,302. Now, in the entire Revolutionary War, according to DAR, they have the names of 6,637. We now believe the number is closer to 10,000, but 4,000, 6,000, the bulk of these people came from the North and the bulk came from Massachusetts. we'll get a little bit more into that. So here are the counties of Massachusetts. And if you'll notice the number 3016, that means almost every able-bodied African man in Massachusetts was in the Revolutionary War. So this wasn't just a few here and a few there. Again, 1,800. And of that 1,800, there were only 3,000 African-American men in Massachusetts and mulattoes. So they got it. They drank the Kool-Aid. They really believed in this stuff. They believed in the principles of what happened to Crispus Attucks being the first to be assassinated on March 5th, 1705. Now, at the surrender of Yorktown, and it may seem I'm getting ahead of myself, but I'm not, Massachusetts said, you know, war's over. We sent a lot of men to this war. You know what I think we need to do? We need to do a tally of all the men who served in the Revolutionary War. So they came up with a 17-volume book called The Massachusetts Soldiers and Sailors of the Revolutionary War. They counted the noses. 17 volumes. They were the first to fight in the war, and they were the last to fight. And the 17 volume published by the Massachusetts Secretary of State. So they said, before these men die, before we lose records, we want to do an audit because we know we sent more than anybody else. So this collection has the name, the age, the town, the residence, the rank, the date of location, enlistment, length of service, where they left the service, and their physical features. Physical features. That meant they said they were Black, they were mulatto, they were of color, they were free. So in these 17 volumes, they provide us with information. Now, as much information they provided, some of them were not tabulated, which I'll show you momentarily. But long after the Brits left Massachusetts, they continued to send and feed the war, and the largest number of any came from Massachusetts. And they were in every single battle from Bunker Hill to Yorktown. By the numbers, everyone says approximately 200,000 men served in the Continental Army, never more than 45 to 48,000 men at a given time. No more than 13 served at any time in any given battle. 2/3 of the Africans brought to America arrived by the time of the Revolutionary War. So again, we look at the numbers, you know, there's I don't know, there's 44 million of us today, but only about 350,000 came here, and the majority of them came by the Revolutionary War. At the time of the Revolutionary War, 1 out of 5 Americans was of African descent. 5 to 10% of the enlistments were African American, and they represented 20 to 25% of the man hours. Now, how is that possible? I'm going to show you. 2/3 of those arrived at the time of the Revolutionary War. That comes from the Emory University database. So now we're talking numbers. At the time of the Revolutionary War, 1 out of 5 was of African descent. Now, in 1760, as you can see, 20% of the population was African descent. 1770, 21, 1780, 20, 1790, the number starts to go down because you've got more Europeans coming over. But you can see the numbers. 5 to 10% of the enlistment. Now, you show something that says 20 to 25% with man hours, so we want to understand that a little bit. A French officer said he looked out at Yorktown, so impressed that they realized they won the war, and he sees 1/4 of Yorktown of Black and Indigenous men. You know that stood out in his mind. How is this possible? Well, if approximately 6,600 men of color, including African, Indigenous, and multiracial men, made up 1/5 of the Continental Army. So let's stick with that number, 6,600. There's an estimate between 83,000 to 231,000 on average served, which is average of 157,000. But let's round it off to 200 because I'm not good at math like I used to, so I got to round stuff off. So prior to 2008, it was accepted that 5,000 served. The DAR book has 6,611. Recent projections are between 7,500 to 10,000. So we'll say 10,000 average. Now, here, this ancestor, they were not in the DAR book. And we're now finding out through our research, such as one of your own, was not in the database. So we know a lot of these men were not in the book. Now, the book primarily, the 17 volumes, was primarily predicated on the pension records. But because of the money that they had, they were ineligible for pensions, and that's why they weren't in the book. But we're going to still stick with that 6,000 number. So if the average white patriot served from 6 to 12 months, now do we have any DAR daughters here? Okay, how long did your ancestor serve?
I think he served 2 6-month terms.
Okay, anyone else? How long?
He was involved before Revolutionary War and then served most of the war.
Okay, so DAR will attest through their own members that the average length of time was 6 months, but I'm gonna say 9 months for reasoning. Now, the reason for that is when a battle came to an area, the farmers came out, and when the battle left, the farmers went home. They had to take care of business at home. So they didn't stay long. Black patriots served between 48 and 72 months. So we'll do an average of 60 months. And I'll explain shortly. But to be conservative, because I don't want anyone to think I'm fudging the numbers, we think it's close to 60, but I'm going to say they served on an average of, what did I do here? Oh no, that's right. I'm going to do an average of 40. So if I take 1,690 hours, 400 hours, that comes to 24% of the man hours were of African American soldiers. And that's a very, very conservative number. So I inflated European soldiers, I deflated African American soldiers, and this comes up to the 20, everyone, so for the past 250 years, people said, there's no way a quarter of the soldiers were Black. There's no way. But if you look at the man hours, well, all of a sudden, we understand. Now, I know someone's going to say, why did African and Indigenous men serve? I mean, why the discrepancy? Why did the white soldiers not serve and the Black soldiers did? Well, I just explained to you, the white soldiers were farmers. They had to get back to their farms. But the Black soldiers were promised freedom for service. So if you stay for 1 year, we will give you freedom. Well, what the hell do you think happened? They stayed. So right there's an explanation of 3 or 4 months versus 12 months. And when the word spread that if you serve for 1 year, we will give you freedom, now you understand why they stayed. But that's not the rest of the story. They were also told if you stay for 3 years, we will give you bounty land. Bounty land. We will give you bounty. Now, these are men who were treated as chattel property. These are men who worked the land. These were men who were treated like the horse and the cow, and now you're going to give me land? For 3 years? Damn, I've been a slave for 27 years. I certainly can do 3. And that's what they did. So the bounty land warrants were first awarded through the Act of Congress on September 1776 and established guidelines for getting land. So if you were a colonel, you got 500. If you were a lieutenant colonel, you got 450. And if you were a private, you got 100 acres of land. What do you think they did? Cha-ching, cha-ching. And not only did they stay, at the time they would have left, they started paying the soldiers. So they were sending the money home so they can buy farm equipment, they can buy seeds, they can build a house. So this really was an incentive. So you talk to so many people from the South and they say, Grandma owned all this land. We never knew how they got it. And now we're doing the research. It's going back to the Revolutionary War.
So these land grants were given to them where they were from?
Not in a, no.
Okay.
Good question. George Washington said, I know the Brits are going to come back. We're going to do bounty land on the frontier because you all are soldiers. And we're going to group you all on. So that's why you're finding them on the peripheral at that time. So you find them in North Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, Ohio, Maine. That's where they got the bounty land. Now, today, it just seemed, but that's where they went. If you wanted 100 acres, you want to, now, if you want to be closer to home, you might only get 40 acres. But they got land.
Yeah.
That was important to them. So now you understand why they stayed as long as they did. Now, July 4th is important to us as we particularly look at the 250th anniversary of the founding of the United States on July 4th, 2026. That is what this is all about. So it's important that we know that America's true forgotten patriots were those men of African and Indigenous descent because of the length of time that they served in the war. And mind you, many of them died. So we don't know about them because they're not in the records. I'm sorry, question?
I was just curious, when Congress passed the Bounty Land Grant Act, how did the owners of the slaves react to that? How were they compensated?
Well, you forgot about the first thing. You served 1 year, you became free.
That probably didn't make them happy either.
Yes, ma'am.
So if they died, did that land pass to their family?
Well, in the case of James Melton, who had smallpox, and he died up on Bunker Hill and was buried, when the men came back to Hertford County, North Carolina, they told his sister, and his sister got his bounty land.
Oh, that's.
Yeah, you can hold questions because now, when we think about Americans of African and Indigenous descent who fought in the Revolutionary War, there's a large group who did not, the enslaved. But they're the ones who tilled the land for the food that the soldiers ate. They're the ones that, through husbandry, helped the coats being born, the sheep being born, and that became the food that the soldiers ate. So this is not just about the men and women who served, it's also those who provided aid and comfort. So we can't forget the enslaved who also played a crucial role in the Revolutionary War. Now, African Americans have always answered the call to military service. So I don't understand all this stuff that's going on now that DEI and we're being promoted and all this other stuff. And you really don't want to get me in that conversation, but be that as it may, we've always served. Now, there were actually Black regiments. There were the Bucks of America. And that was 100% all-black regiment out of Massachusetts. And I am so proud to say that I descend from a buck of America. Now, they were limited to Massachusetts, and they primarily looked out for the waterways in case the British came back up the coast or up any of the tributaries. That was their job, to make sure that if the British came back, they would sound the alarm. This is a flag that the governor of Massachusetts gave them. And there was also a medallion that they were all given, like a medal. And my grandfather had this. And as a kid, he had it on his bureau. And to this day, nobody knows who got it. And we hope that it wasn't just tossed in the trash. But we remember that. We all remember this thing because he treasured it on his bureau. But this is a medallion that the men got. And it has the initials, I think the flag has the initials of the governor's son from Massachusetts. Now, at this point, Washington's beginning to realize the importance of these men of color. So he sends to the governor, Nicholas Cook of Rhode Island, Your Excellency's favor of the 23rd, enclosing a resolution of the General Assembly of Rhode Island for raising a number of black men has been received. So he's letting the governor know, I received this order. The measures adopted appeared to me to be founded in sound policy, and I shall cheerfully comply with the requisition made to me. He's now accepting a black regiment called the 1st Rhode Island. So here he went, I don't want any, to now realizing part of my army, you know, and those of you who served in uniform, you know, if you take a quarter of your troops' strength and put it behind your hands, you may not win the battle. He needed them. And this is a painting done by David Wagner. It's listed, the US Army has it. Did you know that Haitian soldiers were at the Battle of Savannah, Georgia? September 16, 1779, they saved Savannah. And we don't hear about that. Here's another painting of the Battle of Savannah. As I indicated, we're hiding in plain sight. African-American men have always served our nation from the Revolutionary War to 1812. And you know what's very interesting? My mother joined DAR in 1983 under Private Caesar Russell. I did the research. I thought I knew everything about this man. I just found out about 8 weeks ago that he also received a commission for the Napoleonic Wars. And never knew that. Now, I knew I had someone in the War of 1812, but I didn't know anything about the Napoleonic Wars. And in your own Daniel Coleman, whose beautiful picture is over there from Loudoun County. And he enlisted for a term of 18 months in early 1781 in Maryland. And he served until the capture of Lord Cornwallis at Yorktown. So in your own backyard, you have a number of men, and you can see their beautiful, and the artist is down back there, and you really got to take your hat off of her. The artwork that she's done is phenomenal, but it brings these people to life. You actually see them, and you can feel them. You can really appreciate who they are. And thank you so much for the artwork. America 250, as you can see, has a deep meaning to Americans of African descent. So America 250 means an awful lot to me. So I'm not going to let anyone change the intent of what the American Revolution is as much as they would like to, or change the racial composition of Crispus Attucks. Ain't going to happen so long as I'm above ground. So it's important that we don't allow others to steal our ancestors' story, because the voices of our ancestors were taken away from them. And I'm going to explain to you why you don't hear anything about them. You don't know anything about them. You didn't read anything about them. And that was intentional. So we know about the young, we know about the old, and we know about the vagabonds. You know, this is an iconic picture. We knew about all these people, but you didn't know about ours. And there's a reason for that. And unfortunately, their success was their legacy. Now, the American Revolutionary War was from April 19th, 1775 to September 3rd, 1783. And I want you to hang on this date, 1783, and that's why I circled that. So remember, 1783, and we don't hear about 1783. Prince Hall, many of you, someone said, uh-oh, many of you heard about Prince Hall out of Massachusetts. The Masons. And Prince Hall was part of the group of men who were very prominent in terms of their support for the Revolutionary War. They were very supportive of the issues around the Revolutionary War. And during Shays' Rebellion, he actually told the governor he would take a group of Black men out and help squash Shays' Rebellion. I said, no, we don't want that. You got guns, they got guns, we don't want that. But the thinking of Prince Hall and the other men had a very important thing happen in 1783. And during the years between 1781 and 1783, the Supreme Court had what they called the Quock-Walker case. It followed behind the Mumbai case, and you'll see her iconic picture there in the back, bringing it to life. So again, our phenomenal artist from Loudoun County has Mum back there. But what happened in 1783, I don't want you to get lost on this. Those soldiers, 1,600 of them, came back home, and you know what they said to the governor in the state of Massachusetts? We believed in what you said, and we want to be manumitted, each and every one of them. And in 1783, Massachusetts abolished slavery. In 1783, the same year the Revolutionary War ended. How about that? And when Massachusetts did their Constitution in 1780, in their Constitution, they said all men are created equal. And these Black men came back and says, who? We the people? That means us too. And what's interesting in this particular case, it was this Robert Treat Paine and Massachusetts Supreme Court Justice Cushing, who became one of the first Supreme Court justices. They facilitated the lawsuit so the state would lose. That was their intent. And my family was involved with Cushing, Supreme Court Justice. So I got a book out, you can read all about that, but that's neither here nor there. So why didn't you know this, you ask? Why didn't any of us know this, you ask? Because the southern states were upset that Black men had guns. Sound familiar? They were upset that armed Black soldiers in the time of battle were killing white Englishmen. And the mere thought that there was manumission of Black men in their families, they weren't going to have it. And many of these Revolutionary War soldiers, to make money, after the war, they went to work on the ships. And they would not when the ships went south, they wouldn't let the Black men off because they didn't want them telling the word to get out to the other enslaved. And that's when you started having rebellions like Nat Turner. They were hearing about all these people up north free. How is that possible? So you can understand why that was contained. They didn't want that information getting out. So the forgotten patriots, it was intended that their legacy be forgotten. They went so far in 1792 to actually pass a law that barred Black men from entering the United States military And that law stayed in effect until 1862, when they allowed blacks to come in as part of the United States Color Troops. So you see how this all came together? The sheer numbers of these black men coming from Massachusetts down to Virginia, down to North Carolina, down to South Carolina, they weren't happy. So America's Forgotten Patriots, it's a 5-part series. Again, you can find the names of 6,600, and I say 637, in the book called The Forgotten Patriots. Now, those of you who are not familiar with this book, please don't try to go out and buy it because they're not selling it anymore. DAR was so gracious, they saved it as a PDF, and you can actually get it off their website and find the names of the Forgotten Patriots. And we're in the process of putting a database together with all these names, and we're now going to start looking for the descendants. So we're going to start making that announcement very, very soon to help with genealogical research. So before I open this up for questions, and you and Shelley didn't think I would finish with all my slides in 45 minutes.
Yeah.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to have a slide presentation going behind me, and you will see the iconic art where we're hiding, and you'll see the big picture, and I blew up the person of color in the pictures. So hopefully this continues, so we give them their voices back, and now I'll take questions. Was I that bad?
No.
Yes, sir.
So that database from Massachusetts that you said is now available,
The 17-volume book
Yes.
series, yes.
that's available in PDF form from.
You can go to Family Search, you can find it. You can go to ancestry.com and find it. So yes, it's there. Yes, you can find it.
Other volumes from other states besides.
Other states have it. I don't think they are as complete as Massachusetts is. While we are finding additional patriots that are not in the Massachusetts book, we're finding them other ways. Not as many proportionally as with some of the other states. Yes, ma'am.
Because you said we were looking to find the descendants. Is there any way to use DNA to maybe find out if someone is related to a certain person?
You know, I'm not as smart as Shelley Murphy down back. And she's going to talk about that in her presentation. So can you hold that question for her? Because I don't want to show you how smart I'm not. Yes, sir.
I'm wondering how many of the promises of freedom and land grants were actually received by the Black Patriots that served.
We're going through the land patterns right now, and quite a few. Now, there were a lot of broken promises.
Oh, yeah.
There are a lot of men who received land grants and they sold them for cash. You start to see where some of them sold it so they could buy their family members, particularly in some of the southern states. So there were a lot of, so we're finding a lot of bounty land claims now, but we're also finding some stories where they didn't hold on to the land for very legitimate reasons. Yes, ma'am.
I understand they have the records for those who fought in battle. Are there any records for those that provided aid and comfort or that were prisoners of war? So my ancestor was, I'm a DAR member because my ancestor was a prisoner of war and released at Yorktown.
Because around the country, people are hearing what we're doing. A lot of those prisoner of war records are at the local level, the county level, and people are now bringing that to our attention, such as the slave ships up in New York. And a lot of Black men were in those very horrible conditions on those slaves. So we're actually having people send those to us. So that was an aid and comfort. Yes, we are finding instances where people who were not in battle went to get a pension and they documented how they provided aid and comfort. So we're finding those in the pension records as well, although they didn't serve. They documented how they might have, fed a troop of soldiers or whatever the case may be. So yes to both of those. Yes, ma'am.
My understanding of that is the law did not necessarily allow you to get compensation if you weren't in actually a combatant. They did change that law later in the teens, and they were overwhelmed. The government couldn't afford
That's correct.
to pay,
Correct.
all the claims, and then they withdrew it. So
Well, but there's two pieces to that, and you're absolutely correct. So just because there's a claim doesn't mean that they receive the funds, but those claim records are there, which is the answer. So if you ask me, had they gotten the money, I would have given that answer there, but the records are there for research purposes. And most of them say rejected, or whatever the case may be, but the records are there. Any other questions? Steve?
Thanks, Rick. You know how much I like numbers, so this is really good to have the numbers in there. I'm interested because I juxtapose for just a minute in terms of the people that were patriots here. What percentage of those African Americans and Indigenous that were here actually became sympathizers with the British in terms of people that went a different direction to find their kingdom?
Well, the Dunmore Proclamation and the Phillipsburg Proclamation, there's an estimate that 20,000 enslaved people fled. There's very little documentation on that. Many of them were recaptured, and that's really where the slave patrols really began to come forward during the Revolutionary War and after the Revolutionary War, because this was profit that these enslavers were losing. The many who, in fact, served for the Royal Army, after they left, they were sent back to slavery. Now, Andrea will talk a lot more about those that went north as part of the Loyalists with the Birchtown. And there is the documentation of the 3,000 names in the Book of Negroes. And I'm on the board of, I was on the board of Francis Tavern in New York, where that all took place. So there is documentation, but 3,000 versus 20,000, you can see there's a large number with that documentation. Now, one of the things that we're trying to do, I think, I could be wrong, that those names are someplace. There's something there, because as you know, slave ads that went in the newspapers, and they were, even back then, those documents got to be someplace. So I'm hoping as time goes forward, we can begin to reconstruct that, but there's nothing out there formal yet, to my knowledge.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Mhm.
Any idea or records about people who may have been sympathizers were brought back in as enslaved, then became enlisted in the support of the US?
Well, yes. As a Black man who might be a better, I'm going to look at who I think is winning the war. And I'm going to look at which side would I be better served in terms of who's going to win the war, who's going to make me free. So you do see men that were on the royal side, the continental side. So you do see some of that in the records. Some of the spies, you see that, well, they say, hey, I'm in so-and-so's household, I can get you this information. So you do see some of that in the records. So we were pretty sophisticated. So we understood that it depends on what side the bread is going to be best buttered on.
Thank you.
Any other questions? And you know what they were called? They were two groups. You had the camp followers.
And don't talk about them, because I got that covered. Right on there. Don't stop.
Yeah, so Shelley's got that covered. Okay. And there was another question, so. Yes, sir. Then you also have the women, like in every other war, who stayed behind to help feed the war machinery.
Sure.
So when these African-American men got their freedom, they got their bounty land, they're sending money home. These women were using that money to build family wealth. And one of the reasons why we don't know a lot about a large number of men, because they weren't eligible for the pensions, they weren't destitute. So the numbers could be twice what we think, we just don't know. But the women, many of them were behind the war machinery, taking care of the families. So they very much were involved, but in a different capacity. Yes, sir.
That's the last question.
Well, that should be the last question. She had her hand up. Okay.
No, we got
Good.
time to start.
Of the slaves who fled to Lord Dunmore after the Battle of Great Bridge, which they had down in Norfolk, they retreated to Gwynn's Island.
Yes.
And on that, it was very confined in a small space. And some of these people hadn't been exposed, I think, to a lot of diseases.
That's right.
And of course, smallpox, measles, typhoid, and wiped out, I'd say, almost all of them from the records I've seen.
And that's a good point. There were a number of instances where, and you're going to realize, particularly in the South, the plantations were pretty much segregated. They were far from one another, and the enslaved were not supposed to leave. So they were not exposed to some of the immunities that some of the other people were. So when they came together, they were very, very susceptible to a lot of these diseases. And Cotton Mather out of Massachusetts noticed that the enslaved in Boston were either not getting smallpox or they got a very mild case of it because they had learned in Africa how to take the pox and put it in the skin and so forth and so on. However, they were first generation. The second and third generation didn't learn those African remedies and those African skills that would help preserve them. So the further the generations got away from Africa, the more susceptible they were to, they didn't have the immunities that the others had. So very good point that a lot of these places, they get wiped out. So I'm sorry, I'm supposed to finish 10 out. So I hope I shared with you a little bit about the Forgotten Patriots, and I hope I shared with you my passion about who they are. And again, since I descend from them, I take this very personal, and I want to make sure that when I provide this information, that you, the audience, understand that if there's 6,000 men then, there are probably 6 million of us now.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, and this is Colonel Louis Cook. And although he appears to be indigenous, he was Afro-Indigenous, and he was the highest ranking officer who was Black Indigenous in the Revolutionary War.